Hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, we're going to be making a bracelet jig. Well, this week guys, in continuing with our Paracord series, this will most likely be the final video on that series, but we're going to be making a bracelet jig. And what the bracelet jig allows you to do is it frees up your hands to weave the paracord into survival bracelets, lanyards, etc., etc., and allows you to make different lengths of a bracelet just by adjusting the length of the jig. Now, we're going to be using all scrap material to make this, so what we're going to do for starters is we're going to grab ourselves some scrap pine off of the wood rack. Well, this jig is a rather simple one, and we're going to start off with the parts or the pieces that you're going to need. And we've got some 3/4 inch thick pine here. It's just scraps that I've taken out of the wood rack. And I've got two pieces that are 2 inches wide and they're 8 inches long. These will be the platform or the working area of our jig. And then I've got two pieces that are 3/4 inch thick, 2 inches wide, and these are 4 inches long each, and they will be the uprights. So the first thing that you want to do is in one of the uprights, decide which will be the bottom and which will be the top, and from the bottom, 1 inch up, cut a 3/4 inch dado that will be about 3/8 of an inch deep on this piece. Now, you don't have to use a dado blade, and in fact, I'm just going to nibble away at it with a cross-cut blade until I get the size that I want. And so I'm going to cut this dado, test fit one of these pieces in it, and then we'll move on to cutting the dado in this side. Now the measurements are a little different for that, but what you want to do is you want to put a dado in this, same thing, 3/8 of an inch deep, 3/4 of an inch wide, but this one will be 1 3/4 of an inch up from the bottom. So I'm going to cut those two dados and then I'm going to come back and show you the next step. And there we have our two dados cut. This one here is a little looser than I would like, but it's just a bracelet jig and I'm not too concerned. If yours is loose like that and you're concerned about it, you can feel free to redo it and not settle for it, but it's just a simple jig for me, so I'm okay with this. Now, this is the way this jig goes, is that these pieces will sit upright like this, and they're meant to fit together just like this, and this will slide for your adjustability on the length of your bracelet. So what we're going to do now is in each one of these pieces, we're going to cut a 1/4 inch wide slot all the way along here. We're going to leave a little bit at each end, probably 1/2 inch at each end, and for that we're going to actually be using a scroll saw. I could have used the router table, but maybe some of you don't have a router table, so I'm trying to keep this as simple as I can. If you don't have a scroll saw, you could use a coping saw, and of course the router table is just fine. Barring any of those, if you don't have a router table or a scroll saw or a coping saw, you could potentially cut this out with a table saw, making it so that these are two separate strips down here, leaving a 1/4 inch gap, and then putting an end cap on it, gluing it in place to finish it off. But let's mark this out, and then I'll take it over to the scroll saw and cut it out. So these pieces are 2 inches wide. We'll mark a center line at 1 inch, and then we're going to come back 1/8 of an inch on either side to give us our 1/4 inch strip or groove that we need. And of course, this mark here is where it sits inside the dado. It's a mark 3/8 of an inch in from the end. Well, we're going to bring this out another 1/2 inch to show where the slot ends, and the same thing on this side. We're actually going to come in about 1 inch or maybe even 3/4 of an inch from the other end. So cut your slots and then come back and see me. I've got those slots cut with the scroll saw, and we'll just pop these pieces out of the middle here. And there's one, and we'll just pop this other one out. There's the second. Now, these pieces here you can just get rid of. You're also going to need for this jig a 1/4 20 bolt that's 2 inches long, a couple of 1/4 inch washers, and a wing nut. But before you do any of the rest of the assembly of the jig, just take your 1/4 20 bolt, place it in the slot that you've cut, and run it end to end just to make sure that it slides smoothly all the way from end to end. I've got a little bit of resistance here at this end, so I may sand that a bit, but this one here, we'll see, this one slides just fine. So what we're going to do now is you want to give all these pieces a light sanding just to take away the rough edges, and then we're going to glue it together. And in order to glue it together, one piece will go into the dado just like that. Make sure that you keep an eye on which end you left that 1 inch at, because that's going to make a difference as to where it goes in the dado. And then glue the other piece in, and then they will sit on top of each other as such. So go ahead, glue those together, and we'll carry on once we get that done. And here we have both of our jig pieces, and I actually ended up screwing in some number 8 by 1.25 inch wood screws and countersinking them in just to make it a little more stable. As well, these end pieces, before I took the groove out until there was a 1 inch gap here, I've changed this to a 1/2 inch gap. And now that we've got this done, it's time to put the jig together. We've given everything a light sanding, and the jig just sits together like this. And from there you take your 2 inch by 1/4 20 bolt, put one washer on it, put it down through our assembly with another washer, and then our wing nut will go at the end of that. And this basically is the jig put together. We have a couple more things that we need to do to it, and we're going to get to that. We have some markings to put on the side, but as well now we need a way to hold our bracelet while we're working on it, and that's what we're going to do now. Well, the next step that we want to take is fasten a couple pieces of hardware to the top of our jig here so that we can hold our bracelet in place when we're working. And what I've got here is one of the clasps of a bracelet, both the, I guess, male and female end we'll call it, and I have a cable clip that I've flattened out, and all I'm going to do is put this cable clip through the one end, and at 3/4 inch in from the end, just like this, with the cable clip, with the bracelet clasp attached, I'm going to screw this thing down. As well, then the other end of the clasp, this piece will get screwed to the other side. And what this does is give us something to connect our actual bracelet clasps to while we're working. These will actually become a piece of the jig. This is the original form of the cable clips, and I've just flattened them out. The other part that I want is I want to use an L hook like this, and that as well will be 3/4 inch in the middle, one at each end pointing to the outside, and that will just make it so that if we want to make something a little longer that we're not necessarily using these type of clasps, it just makes the jig a little more versatile. So there we have the hardware on the jig mounted. We have our 2 L hooks here for hooking paracord on while we're working on things, as well as our bracelet hardware for the jig, both a female and on this side the male end mounted. And now it's just a matter of adding some markings to the side here for the length of bracelet that you're making. Now you can use whatever method you want. You can use pen, you can use pencil, marker, what have you. I'm going to be using a wood burner just because I have one and I like using it and it's fun. So I'm going to show you how to lay out these markings, and we're going to add them here, and then depending on the length of the video, I'm going to add in how to actually make a bracelet. So let's get these markings done. Well, here we have the jig assembled, and I just want to show you here, we have a male and a female end clicked into both sides of these pieces here, and you can see that if I were to basically keep the jig in the closed position, here would be the end of my bracelet. You would get roughly a 6-inch bracelet out of this particular measurement or mechanism with the measurements that I've given you. So what we're going to do now is we're going to place measurements on the side of this in order to make it so that if we wanted it longer, we could expand it. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to draw a line in order to mark our stop, or where our 0 mark or our 6 inches is. And it really doesn't matter where along here you do it, as long as it's on the one side. So we're just going to place our square here, and I'm going to run a line top to bottom here, and that will be the mark that we line up for our 6 inches mark. Now from this point in time now, what you want to do is you want to mark along your bottom piece here 1 or a ½ inch increments all the way along, and then we're going to burn them in, and I'll show you what I mean as I go along, and then you might be able to understand a little better. Well, there's our marks almost like a ruler, and we know that fully closed like this is a 6-inch bracelet. And then as you adjust your jig, this would be 6½ inches, 7, 7½, 8, 8½, 9, 9½, 10, and so forth and so on. Then when you get it to the measurement you want, of course, you just tighten down your jig, and there is your measurement then for doing, in this case, a 10-inch bracelet. Now, all I'm going to do at this point is burn those measurements in and add a couple numbers, and then when I get that done, I'll come back and I'll see ya, and that will be it for making the jig. And there it is. The numbers are burned in, and if you want a 6-inch bracelet, well, then you set it at the 6 inches. If you have someone with a bigger wrist and they need an 8-inch bracelet, well, you set it to the 8 inches, center your bolt, and just tighten it up, and then you know that you are now making an 8-inch bracelet from end to end of your clasps. So now that we've got our jig done, and I hope you're happy with yours, let's go ahead and make a bracelet. So for this particular bracelet, I'm going to be making an 8½ inch bracelet. So I've set the jig for 8½, and we're going to secure it to the bench. I've seen a lot of guys that do these bracelets and they don't secure their jigs, and they're fumbling all over the place, and it's just a mess. So for the average adult bracelet, you're going to need 6 to 8 feet of paracord, and again I'm using 550 paracord, and I've cut off 8 feet here. And the first step that you want to do is you want to line up your ends, and you want to melt them and get them so that they're not going to fray on you. And once you line them up, pull it tight so that you have at the other end a loop just like this. So to start your bracelet, it really doesn't matter what end of the buckle you start at, whether it be this end or the other end of the jig. But you're going to take your 2 ends of your, in this case, 8 feet of cord, and depending on the size of buckle, you will either do a single lark's head or a double lark's head knot. And if you were going to do a double, you would loop this through twice. But we're just going to do a single because we're just using small buckles. So you basically pull this through until your loop is set here, just like this, and then carefully double back your ends, and you put them through your loop and pull them all the way through. And then you can just straighten it out if there's any twisting, and then cinch this up to your buckle until it's nice and tight up to the end where it seats. So just cinch it up there and make sure that everything's nice and tight and that you're happy with that fit going on to this buckle. So now that you have your lark's head knot at this end nicely cinched up, what we're going to do is take each one of these ends, and don't cross them, but we're going to go into the other side of the buckle. We're going to go down through and we're going to pull them tight. And you want to be careful that you're not tangling them as I just did, and that you're not crossing them over. That's the important part. Now, like I said, if you have a bigger buckle, I'm using smaller buckles here. If you have a bigger buckle, you would go around here twice. And then what you want to do at this point is we're going to be pulling it tight, and this here is our filler line that's in the middle. And what we're going to be doing at this point is we're going to be doing a square knot over the filler. And I hope that this translates to the show all right and to the camera all right. But we're going to take this side right here and we're going to be putting it underneath our filler, just like that. Can you see that? That we're underneath. This side here now, this side is going to go underneath here, then it's going to go over our filler and through this loop, just like that. Can you see that? So it's just a simple little knot, just like you were tying your shoes. And this is called a square knot over filler. And what we're going to do is we're just going to cinch this all up, make it nice and tight. And once we get it cinched up and tight and we're happy with the way it is, we're going to do the process again. So we will lay this one out just like that. This one comes underneath our filler over top of the one that we laid out over here. Then the end of that one goes over our filler and through that little loop. And there we are again with another square knot over our filler. And you just want to cinch it up and tighten it and get it so that you're happy with the way that the paracord is lying. And then again, we're just going to keep going like this until we reach the other side of our jig. So I'm going to continue to make the knots here, the square over the filler, as I said, and tightening and rearranging and making sure that everything looks good as I go. And I will see you when that is done and we'll finish off the bracelet. And now that you're at this stage, it's time to finish off your bracelet. So the first thing to do now that you've got your knots, your square knots all the way to the end, is release your bracelet out of the jig and flip it over so that the inside of your bracelet is on the upper or facing up and the outside of your bracelet is facing down. So once we get that clicked in, now what we need to do is these ends here, we're going to loosen off that last knot that we did. And once we loosen it off, we're going to take these ends and feed it in through this one knot or this one section right here. Let me see if I can zoom in on that for you. So here is our last knot. We're just going to loosen it off a touch, and what we want to do is get this section right here. See this little loop, this last loop that I'm just pulled up? We're going to take this and we're going to bring our live ends down through this one piece. Both live ends down through, and once we get them down through, we're going to finagle it a little bit and tighten our loop back down, tighten our knot back down so that it fits properly and looks right on the bracelet. And just like when we made the monkey fist last week, that could take a bit of finagling, so don't get frustrated with it. We just need to work at it and get this knot tightened, that's all. Just takes a little bit of finagling, and once you get it in there, I mean, you'll know that it's right. And you can take it out of the jig and check the other side to make sure that it looks like it's tightened and that everything looks right. It's a little loose for my liking, so we'll just continue to tighten that, and with these two ends hanging out like that. And once we get this done and everything is tightened and we like the way the bracelet looks, what we're going to do is snip these two ends off as close to the end here as we can, snip them off, and using a lighter we're going to heat them up and tap them flat just so that they don't fray on us. And then, like I said, once you get it tightened up, we're just going to snip these ends just like this and heat them up with a lighter and tap those ends flat so that they sit properly underneath your bracelet. And once you get those ends tucked in, all there is just to put your bracelet on. It might need a little bit of finagling to get it to lie flat, as the paracord is rather stiff when you're first tying the knots in it, but it will loosen up and it will be much softer and more pliable once the knots loosen up and settle in their final resting position. But there you go, a survival bracelet. And there you have it. A bracelet jig for paracord and the method of how to make a simple survival bracelet. Now, why are they called survival bracelets? Well, it's quite simple. For starters, if you ever should be in a survival situation, you now have 8 feet of rope. And paracord is an extremely strong rope, and it'll serve you well should you need that rope. And if you ever should get stranded and need that sort of thing, if you're into camping or that sort of thing, that 8 feet of paracord could be imperative. As well, I've seen other people who weave fishing hooks into this bracelet. And while that sounds a little odd, basically the fishing hook is laid on your center core strands, and then you tie your knots over top of that fishing hook, which will allow it to be sealed inside the bracelet, safe from sticking into your hands. And should you ever be camping and get stranded somehow, you now have the means to, if you're near water of course, catch yourself something to eat. If you're nowhere near water, well, I guess you're just out of luck. But either way, guys, it's just another fun project, something different to try. If you're like me and you can only get out to the shop on the weekends, sometimes you want a little something fun to play with while sitting inside during the week. And goofing around with paracord is a perfect thing to do if you are sitting inside the house, as opposed to being able to come out to your shop and make sawdust. So guys, this was the last paracord show. I will not be doing any more after this, unless of course it's requested. But for now, this is it. The 3 shows is plenty, just to give you guys a taste of something a little different and to mix it up. You know, the show, like I said before, is not all about making sawdust. Sometimes we branch out into different areas and we have a lot of fun with that. And I'm hoping that you guys are going to join me and try this and have a bit of fun with it. It's not all about the sawdust, guys. Well, that's it for this week. I hope you're going to try this project. And guys, I hope you're going to join me again next week for yet another woodworking video.